welcome to Cities on the Frontline. Today we will talk about urban heat. I'm Francis Guesquière. I'm the practice manager for urban development and disaster risk management at the World Bank for the East Asia region. Lauren will present our speakers in a minute, but before we start, let me remind everyone of the intention of this speaker series and the ground rule for the conversation. The purpose of these global webinars is to have open and honest learning conversations. The calls are not on the record, and we ask that you not attribute any comments unless you have the person's express permission to do so, and we will help you get those permissions if required. We have about 360 people registered for the call today, so to facilitate the discussion, we ask that you use the Q&A function to ask your question. Note that the recording of the session and the PowerPoint presentation will be posted online next Monday. Lauren, over to you. Lauren, you're still on mute. There you are.
Thank you, Francis. It's a pleasure to be here. As always, I'm Lauren Sorkin, Executive Director of the Resilient Cities Network. And tonight we're talking about really a key rising challenge for cities. It's often called the silent killer. Urban heat is becoming more and more extreme every year as climate change impacts intensify. A lot of the estimates tell us that about mid-century, about 3.5 billion people globally are going to be affected by urban heat, and 1.6 billion of those people will be in urban centers. So heat waves are a huge concern as they continue to grow in frequency and in duration and in intensity. Just to give you an idea, the International Labor Organization estimates that there will be about $160 billion in lost wages annually in the US by the end of the century, and that's just in the US. So tonight we're going to talk about some solutions for those issues and learnings from Resilient Cities Network's Urban Heat Community of Practice. We're going to be hearing from two incredible women leaders from our cities, from The Hague and from Athens. And we're also going to be hearing about some of the work that our partners at the Atlantic Council Resilience Center are doing to promote awareness and combat the effects of extreme heat. So without further ado, let me give a quick introduction to our fantastic speakers tonight. First, we will be hearing from Anouk Roeling, who is the program officer at Resilient Hague. And she has been working there at Resilient the Hague since 2018. She has a background in urban sociology and international development and a specialization in sociology of crisis and disaster. So for the resilience program in The Hague, she works mainly on cyber resilience, risk communication, and of course the local heat plan. We are then going to be hearing from our Chief Resilience Officer and Senior Advisor to the Mayor of Athens on resilience and sustainability, as well as Senior Fellow and Advisor to the Adrian R. Rockefeller Resilience Center and member of our Resilient Cities Steering Committee, Lenio Miravilli. She was elected and served as Deputy Mayor for Urban Nature and Climate Resilience, which has to be one of the best names of an urban mayorship, from 2014 to 2019. And then she spent a year at Harvard University as a Loeb Fellow. We're so glad to have her back in Athens now to do all of the wonderful work she's doing. And we're looking forward to hearing from you tonight. So without further ado, let me turn the microphone and the screen over to you, Anouk.
Thanks, Lauren. I will share my presentation. Okay, so you should see my screen. So welcome everybody, great to be here. I think it's great that we have the opportunity to talk about urban heat because I think it's becoming an increasingly important topic. Lauren just introduced me. I'm a program officer for Resilient the Hague, and from that position I work on the local heat plan, and I'm also involved in the community of practice on urban heat for the Resilient Cities Network, which I will be talking about today. So just to go to the agenda of my presentation, first I will talk about the urgency of urban heat and specifically why it's important for The Hague to work on it. Then I will talk to you about our heat approach on the short term and the long term and how we've been developing that over the last year, especially with the help of the community of practice. And I will conclude by stating what the value of the community of practice has been and what the next steps will be. So to kick off my presentation, I will show you a heat map of The Hague. What you can see here is the extent to which the neighborhoods in The Hague heat up when there is a heat wave. And you can see that there are some areas in the city that get significantly hotter than others. There's a pretty big difference between the different areas, and especially the center of the city gets the hottest. Beyond the fact that these areas get really hot, you can also see that they have several other characteristics that make it problematic for the people that live there to deal with heat. You can see here in the lower right corner the livability scores for The Hague, and you can see that the same areas that get so hot are also the same areas that have the lowest livability scores, and that this is measured by income, education, safety, etc. So in The Hague, we would say that these areas are in general disadvantaged. I also added some data on health levels in The Hague, because I think it's important to show that it's not just about income or education, but it actually also the general health levels of the people in these areas are lower than for the rest of the city. So you can see here that the percentage of people with a physical disability is higher in this area. The same goes for people with long-term health conditions. The same goes for the percentage of people who deal with extreme loneliness and the percentage of people who deal with obesity, which are all characteristics that we know are making people additionally vulnerable when temperatures get really high. So of course, there are some solutions in The Hague. We've thought about that, but these aren't always working too well for these areas specifically. So for example, we can say, well, you can go to a green space to cool down. But as you can see here, that the distance to green space for the people in these areas is a lot further than for the other areas, which means especially when there is a high percentage of people with a physical disability, it's they have less access to these green spaces. It's more difficult for them to travel. And in the last map, you can see the green roof subsidies. So people can request money to get a green roof, but they also need to have additional funding from themselves, which is hard because this is the people that live there have in general a lower income. So that makes the policy solutions that we have so far not always helpful for the most vulnerable neighborhoods. So that is why for us in The Hague, we said we need to do more to support the people, both in terms of support for the vulnerable citizens, but also in terms of making sure the city doesn't heat up as much on the long term as temperatures just get higher and higher. But The Hague is not an isolated case. We're not the only city dealing with heat. And last year, we started talking with a lot of the other cities in the Resilient Cities Network, and we joined together for a community of practice on urban heat. And as you can see here, I will specify some of the dots here. We're working together now with Sydney, Melbourne, Paris, New York, Milan, London, Montreal. And goals of the community of practice were basically to learn from each other, to exchange experience and knowledge, to connect and cooperate with knowledge institutions, so not just talk amongst professionals, but also get some of the academics, some of the scientists into the conversation, and then filter some of the best practices to see what you actually need to develop an effective urban heat plan. So far, why we're working on it and how we came about to start the community of practice. I will now talk a little bit about the development of the heat approach in The Hague. So we decided to go for two perspectives, a long-term perspective and a short-term perspective and a long-term perspective, because we think that on the long term, it's really important to adapt your city to make sure that it's adapted to heat, that it is cool, that it has enough cool spaces. But at the same time, a city doesn't become entirely green overnight. So on the short term, it's also really important that you provide support for your vulnerable citizens, and that you make them aware of what the impact of heat is. And especially for the Netherlands, that's a challenge, because historically, we're not a very hot country. We're not a country that is used to dealing with long periods of heat, which also means that a lot of people are not aware yet of what it can do. So last year, it was basically the first steps into our local heat plan, and we started off by making a communication plan in which we tried to promote awareness and to give advice. And what we tried to do was to make it specific to the groups living in our city. So we have a lot of expats, a lot of labor migrants. So as you can see, we made posters, not just in Dutch, but also in other languages. And we tried to use a lot of the local channels to spread these posters. So for example, not just hang them at bus stops, but also in the supermarket, at the GP office, at the sports club, for example. And we also try to generate some attention for the issue by handing out bottles. However, we also saw, especially with COVID being a challenge last year, that it's also necessary not to just communicate, but also do something. So we were trying to offer cool spaces to people to go to cool off for a while. However, and that was too difficult to realize last year, also because the ventilation and the air conditioning for COVID wasn't entirely clear. And we also found out that a lot of the locations where people usually go to in the neighborhood are closed during the summer because it's holiday. So if we would have opened the locations, then nobody would have known that they were open. So throughout this year, up until the point of now, we've tried to gather as much lessons as we could to improve our plan. And the lessons that we've learned, I would like to share with you. The first thing, when you start communicating to the people, you have to provide the why. If you just tell people, drink water, at least in the Netherlands, they will say, yeah, of course, I'm not stupid. I know I have to drink water. But then if you explain that it's actually the elderly who have less thirst and forget to drink, then they will tell you, oh, okay, now I get it. Or for example, that medication works differently when temperatures are higher and that you actually have to go to your doctor to check. So for us, last year we said it has to be short, it has to be easy. But for this year, we say we have to diversify our information and we have to make people aware by sharing knowledge and not just give short advice. So the second thing that we said, heat is relatively new to the Netherlands, and we do not really have enough insight yet to how people act, to the kind of behavior they show. For example, do they even change their behavior when it's hot? So we also said for this year, we need to research the needs people have that are vulnerable to heat. The third lesson we learned was that cool places during the summer holidays requires a special approach. A lot of the community centers will be closed. So if you want to provide a cool space that people actually know of, that people can actually reach, you have to change your methods. You have to change the cool spaces you're going to offer. The fourth one, and that is one that was also really clear in the community of practice, use your heat maps. If you're just starting to make a heat approach, try to prioritize the areas in your city. Try to use heat maps to see which are actually the places that get the hottest and who are the people that actually live there. And the last one, which is a bit of an open door, but I think it's still important to say collaborate, especially when you're working on this new topic. And I think that for certain cities, that's more relevant than for others. But if you just started working on the topic of heat and there's not a lot of awareness or not a lot of action going on, it's really important that you talk, that you invest in bonding with communication with organizations in the area, and also make sure that they feel the need and the urgency to do something about it. So this is what we've learned from our approach, but of course we also had a lot of community of practice meetings in which we also learned a lot of lessons. So what I found extremely valuable is the experience of Sydney. It's a city that has a long history of dealing with heat, and they have a lot of experience also with providing cool public spaces. And especially last year, they have given a webinar on how to provide cool spaces when COVID and heat is occurring at the same time. Additionally, New York, who also has a long history with heat waves, did a session on communication and awareness, in which they gave the details on how they communicate to, for example, homeless people. And they said, well, if you communicate to people who have no shelter to go to, they require a different approach than when you're talking to people who actually can go inside. Another thing, what I just said, sometimes it's challenging to provide cool spaces when people don't know about them. So Athens, Paris, Rotterdam, and Milan had experience in using apps to define cool spaces and actually getting people to that cool space, which is also something that we talked extensively about to see whether that would be something to use for The Hague. And then lastly, some experts of the University of Exeter helped us by mapping social media use during heat waves, in which you can see how people actually respond to the heat waves, how they talk about it, do they make fun of it, or do they like it, or do they actually see serious issues occurring. So this led to our improved plan for this year, which I'm very happy about, because we've hired a team from Arcadis, and they are helping us to improve this year's plan. So for communication, like I've said before, we're not just doing posters with advice, but we're also publishing articles in local media in which we explain why the advice that we're giving is important. So we have double interviews with, for example, a resident and an expert who go and get into conversation why it's important for the elderly to drink, for example. And we also learned that we need to make it more visible. So we're going with vans into the neighborhoods to hand out bottles of water and ice creams, and in the meantime provide advice and create awareness on this topic. The next one, we also realized, well, communication is probably not going to do it. You also have to do something. So we're also actually making an actual plan in which we define the responsibilities of different parties. So that can be the municipal health services, the municipality itself, the local organizations, the Red Cross. So we define their responsibilities for the pre-phase, which is winter and spring, warning phase, which is right before summer, and action phase. And this is something that really has to be carried out. So it's not something you communicate about. It's really, for example, for the homeless shelters, when their responsibility in the action phase is to hand out bottles to the homeless, for example. Then the cool places, based on the lessons from last year, we expanded our reach, and we're not just looking at the community centers and the schools, but also religious institutions who regularly do not close during summer, public spaces. And we've also learned from what Sydney and Melbourne and New York told us, when you provide cool spaces, make sure you provide transport, because it's not just important for people to cool down, they also need a good way to get there. Because I mean, if you have to walk 30 minutes to get to a cool space, then yeah, the health benefit kind of gets lost. And lastly, what I said, we're expanding our research on the needs and solutions for the vulnerable elderly. So then going to the long term, our long-term perspective is also definitely adapting the physical space, because you can help people, but you also need to provide them a perspective on the longer term that they will actually have a cooler city. So last year, with the renovation of a park, they greened the park, and they also installed an urban water buffer who contains rainwater, which can be reused again. And I think the great thing is that while doing this renovation and installing this urban water buffer, there was a lot of cooperation with the residents living around the park, which also increased the awareness of what heat actually does. So it was not just the intervention in the physical space, but it was actually also a way to get the conversation going. Additionally, last summer, there was also a research on heat guidelines. actually on cool spaces. So what does a cool space need and how is it actually going with the cool spaces in The Hague? And they did some research on some of the parks, and they saw, for example, that we have a lovely green field in one of the parks, but you cannot actually enter it, which means that you can enter the park, but you cannot sit on the grass, which makes it a perfect green space to cool down, only not so much because you cannot sit down. So this is also something that that we've learned, that it's and also especially discussed in the COP, because we've asked actually the researchers that did the research on the cool spaces to also come into the community of practice and share what a cool space actually needs. And we've also talked with Melbourne and Paris on providing cool spaces and cool routes, and also greening your city. And we've also had an expert from Transolar to talk about how to measure heat and how to actually physically create cool spaces. So what we've learned from this is that it's important to combine the functions of your green space. It's not just about green, it's not just about a remaining place, a cool space for people, but it can be both. It's important to involve private parties. So try to get as much people who are currently not working on heat involved when you are doing adaptations in a physical space. And remember that it's not just about cool spaces, it's also about cool routes. So for this year, I think it's great news to hear that we're giving away 1,000 free trees for residents. It's actually starting this afternoon at 5. Residents of The Hague can apply for a free tree, and they will do this next year as well to improve the green spaces in our city. And we've published our guidelines for climate adaptive city, which has the principle in terms of heat. It's a big topic in this in these guidelines that you implement green unless. So it's always green unless you have a very good reason not to make it green. And I think that kind of way of working on heat does not only mean that you will have a greener city in the future, but it also means that people start talking and thinking about it now. Okay, so we have to do green, but why and how and what does it bring to the city? So conclude that I would like to conclude by stating the value of the community of practice, because everything I've just said has been talked about in a community of practice, and a lot of the knowledge and a lot of the approach that we've developed comes from the work other cities have done, the experts that have talked about their research, and the conversations we had. And I think that just has been great. What we've done now this past year was just sharing knowledge and experience, which has fostered a lot of learning and learning, because there are a lot of cities that are different. When I speak from the position of The Hague, that are different from The Hague. For example, Sydney, New York have a long history with heat, but it's also about relating, because there were also a lot of cities who actually do not have that history like The Hague and are just starting to develop their approach. For example, London, we've talked a lot about how do you even get it on the agenda if you know you're just started to see heat waves, if you can say it like that. So for the future, in the next phase, the COP would like to strengthen the strategic position and strengthen the collaborations, because I think the work we're doing, it's great to share, but I think we can even increase the impact if we start thinking more strategically on how to further our work. So that was my presentation, and then I give the floor back to Lauren.
Thank you, Anouk, and I think you made some excellent points, sharing with us very, very practical examples from The Hague that I'm sure we'll talk about in the Q&A, as well as some of the plans that the community of practice is thinking about to scale up this knowledge and really get the word out and strengthen collaboration around the world. And at the end of the day, that is what we're here to do, to accelerate the solution adoption in cities who are dealing with the same challenges. So I think more on that point, coming to you, Lenio, to tell us more about the work you're doing in Athens and also with the Resilience Center.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Anouk, for a great presentation. Let me try to share my screen. Okay, that should be good. So, as Anouk said, it's important to discuss cities in the context of working together with different on different levels in order to learn and in order to kind of make sure that what they are putting into practice are actually things that are effective and that can actually raise cities' resilience to heat and mitigate heat in the urban environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Athens and then talk about then go to another presentation which will discuss a little bit about the relationship that Athens has started with the Atlantic Council, Arch Rock Resilience Center, and the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, and what we're doing together with them and what they're doing, because I'm also as a senior fellow and advisor there. So and I will start, as I said, talking a little bit about Athens. Athens is very densely built, and that's one of the main problems that the city is facing, apart from the fact that it's probably the most southern European capital of the mainland, of the land of Europe. There's more southern in Malta and in Cyprus, but Athens is the most southern, and it's very badly and densely built, and it has when we started started our resilience trip, trying to kind of raise the resilience of the city, we immediately kind of identified the fact that it really has an uncontrollable cementification, and of course that contributes very much to the urban heat island. So when we kind of put together our resilience strategy, one of the main kind of pillars was the green city pillar and the proactive city pillar. And in the green city pillar, we kind of addressed the issue of heat as a shock, which is also a stress, but it was identified as the main shock for Athens as far as resilience was concerned. And it was heat waves, rising heat in general, more hot days during the summer extending, increasing temperatures, and of course the urban heat island, which exacerbates all of these different, the experiencing and of all of these different heat phenomena. Along with that is flash floods and drought. So this kind of came out also from a couple of studies in 2019, which name Athens as the single city facing the greatest kind of problems from heat, and Moody's also that identified Athens again as the highest in terms of exposure to heat and drought. And we know that we have experienced in Athens about a 5 degrees Celsius hotter during the night and 10 during the day due to the urban heat island, about 200 deaths per year and rising, electricity costs rising in a city that has a rather large percentage of energy poverty, and also commercial and touristic activity kind of declining after it's kind of 34, but I think it's safer to talk about over 35 degrees. We see a more serious percentage of people starting to not go out of their houses so much and not kind of participate in public spaces. And we also have issues that have to do with insects that have been much more aggressive and have kind of are newcomers to the city that have been attacking our trees, which is of course a big issue that has to do with heat. So again, one of the things that we did is as Anouk mentioned, we kind of did a map, which was our sustainability kind of map, correlating issues that had to do with, as you see in the middle, we took satellite temperatures that had to do with heat waves. specific kind of heat waves and where the burden was on the city, and then traced the populations through the census of the most vulnerable populations, which are the older people and the younger people, and also the socioeconomic data, which had to do with people that were from the most low-income neighborhoods that had actually applied. They were below the poverty rate, the poverty level, and they had applied for food, for a food program. So this is kind of this tries to coordinate all these different issues to help us decide how to prioritize the spaces that we were going to do implement our initiatives that had to do with heat, mitigation of heat, and helping kind of supporting and protecting the most vulnerable. We did this year a new heat mapping that is actually a compilation of a 5 years of data that that shows also land heat, and the range that you see here from blue to dark red is between 35 degrees and 45 degrees. So so you see where the green areas are that we have the lowest temperatures, but still we're talking about when we're talking about the higher levels of temperatures in Athens for the last 5 years. And this was provided to us by the Extrema Global, which I will talk about it further down. And also it has to be again correlated with different socioeconomic data, which we have, and we're waiting for the census to come out, and other types of data that we're collecting in Athens. We organized, we had like a climate action plan for adaptation, which is all about heat, and it breaks down into these 4 categories: enhancing the city's blue and green infrastructure, improving the built environment to mitigate heat, protecting public health in the most vulnerable citizens, and raising awareness. So these were the 4 main categories. And we also had the special kind of energy poverty action. And then here, I kind of want to say that these are more or less the guidelines that we have up to now as our heat mitigating goals. But basically, what I would like to kind of return to is what Athens has been doing as strategic partnerships, because this is kind of it has been extremely important for the city, the types of partnerships that it built in order to be able to identify and to kind of organize and to actually assess also the types of actions and the different types of strategies and that it has planned for the city. So we have been really kind of engaged with a Cool Cities network of C40, and we are in the process of signing the C40 Urban Nature Declaration, which will help us with very kind of tight commitments and metrics on making Athens greener and more resilient. We are updating our climate action plan in the fall. We've been working on it the whole year, and we have been supporting The Hague in the urban heat COP of the Resilient Cities Network. And now we are collaborating with the Atlantic Council's Extreme Heat Resilient Alliance, and we are one of the city champions for heat action. So really trying to kind of have as many allies as we can in this fight. And I'm just going to very quickly pass through the different types of actions that we've been doing. For green infrastructure, we've been focusing on green corridors, on new large parks, pocket parks with donations from the private sector that take on and adopt a space and kind of together with the community really kind of help design and implement it. Rejuvenation of our hills, co-design workshops, a digital tree mapping that we've been trying to put together, which is very, very important. We haven't done it yet, but we are still working on it. And hopefully in a couple of years, we'll have a very comprehensive database and for our trees. We've installed public fountains and we are planning to augment this, and also trying to diversifying our water resources, using non-drinkable water for irrigation, and trying to figure out how to do this. And then the second thing is the public health. I mean, there's much more, but I'm just showing a couple for the greening, but these are the main categories. For public health protection, again, as Anouk kind of mentioned, heat waves trigger the opening of air-conditioned community rooms. We are working on how these community rooms can become more appealing and can actually be more attractive for people to go to. We have street workers that hit the streets, also giving water and trying to inform the homeless about how to protect themselves. And also because of COVID, the help at home that we had has been expanded with a lot of different services. So now we have a much more robust network of people that we know where they are and what their conditions are, and we can send people out to make sure that these people, which are usually the elderly and people that have health issues, we kind of know how to get to them. So that's very important, and COVID has helped. Also, we have developed the Extrema app that was then adopted by several other cities in Europe, and now it has gone global, which gives personalized information for heat risk and also tells you where to go and where the closest cooling spots are, depending on where you are, and it's based on personal information that you disclose, your age, your whether you're male or female, and whether you're taking any medication, and this information stays on your phone, but it gives you kind of a personalized risk. And we've also been running campaigns with NFC tags, and which are also at different refugee and immigrant camps in different languages, to make sure that they get the information that they need for protecting themselves, especially for the hot periods. So now I'm gonna kind of shift to our collaboration with the Ash Rock Resilience Center, and I'm gonna jump to a different slide. So I'm gonna close this and open this. I'm very glad that I'm giving this overview, because the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance is something that the Atlantic Council and the Ash Rock Resilience Center has created about a couple of years now. So it's a rather new work that is taking place, and it's really focusing on heat, because it's recognized as it's now becoming very common to call it the silent killer. Heat is the silent killer, and we, as Lauren mentioned in the beginning, we already know that we will have about 1.6 billion people in cities by 2050 that will be dealing with extreme heat, and of course that means risks, like serious risks to their to morbidity and mortality of our communities in the cities. We know that heat waves are a mortal risk, because in Europe, for example, the 2003 heat wave, which killed 70,000 people, is the single climate phenomenon that had the highest morbidity ever in Europe. This is like I mean, for as long as we've been measuring. We also know that, and this is extremely important, but we are increasingly realizing how unequal is heat in the way that it affects people. For example, recently we had a study come out that says that 67% of US communities, majority non-white, have less tree cover, and how this really kind of creates a much higher vulnerability for mortality and morbidity on those particular neighborhoods. So the Ars Rock Resilience Center decided to really kind of take on the extreme heat effort, and to try to minimize the heat-related deaths and the loss of livelihoods that depend on the heat phenomena. So it basically organized the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, which is the ERA, which I will talk about, which has 4 working groups. It also has a science panel and a metrics task force that are related to the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, but also it has other work streams. It's working on an economic impact analysis, mostly for the United States, but hoping to expand it in other parts of the world. A heat wave naming and ranking effort, which is a very important stream in the work of the center. Knowledge sharing and events, which of course is like a whole series of things, as particularly because there is a really robust team of scientists that are constantly kind of discussing and moving along the knowledge, which we think is, as also Anouk mentioned, and Lauren, one of the most important issues relating to heat, because it's obscure, very little is known about it, and a big part of the whole issue is to actually educate decision makers about it to make a difference. Then there's the race to resilience, which is part of the effort of that kind of we are involved in, and which kind of leads to a series of commitments that will be announced in COP26, and different types of communications outreach, which I will mention quickly. Here you can get a little bit of an idea about who are participating in the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance. There are several cities and specific individuals that are very committed and have a lot of knowledge in relation to heat, and also a series of organizations, both American-based and globally based, that include from insurance, big insurance, organizations, and different health-related organizations, and et cetera, et cetera. You can take a look. I'm not going to go through all of them. And how am I doing with time? Should I go really fast, or I have a few more slides, 2 or 3 more slides, Lauren?
About 2 more minutes.
Okay, so the main, as I said, the main goals and focus of is to protect lives and livelihoods from extreme heat, especially focusing on the most vulnerable. It has created 4 work groups: an education work group for decision makers, linked to vulnerable communities. It's based on how can we best educate the people that can make decisions. A second working group on policy recommendations. A third one in issues that have to do with financing, which basically is trying to find clever solutions for financing initiatives for heat reduction, but also trying to, which is a very interesting and very specific issue, to try to find risk transfer products that can help cities kind of really quickly have assets to respond to heat waves. And finally, the implementation group trying to assess and be proposing and supporting cities to implement the best possible kind of policies. Here is a quick view of our heat health science advisory panel. We also have, as I mentioned, the metrics task force, which we think is a very important part of all these things for developing outputs, outcomes, and impact indicators for ERA, but also for the cities themselves, and providing the cities with ways of kind of measuring. The heat naming and ranking is an extraordinarily important thing, initiative, because we really believe it can make an incredible difference in both raising awareness. It's probably the kind of trigger that can best kind of quickly raise awareness and also quickly build preparatory guidelines that are often missing from cities and other types of governing organizations. Of course, it needs a whole kind of, we are trying to make a whole plan of how to go about it. It's quite a significant effort, and it also needs a roadmap and figuring out in each place that we are starting to pilot this, the main stakeholders that we need to approach and how we're going to go about it. Finally, the City Champions of Heat Action is a core of 5 or 6 cities. For the time being, the members are Athens, Freetown of Sierra Leone, Miami-Dade County, and potentially you see which other cities are being considered that have we've been discussing with them and have expressed interest. What these core cities are doing is they're supported by these work groups of the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance with technical assistance and a lot of different types of tools and implementation support. We're also asking the cities to commit to a chief heat officer that can organize internally and externally task forces that can bring together all the different parties that can support the cities with that. And we are also starting to run a heat season campaign with these 5 cities and with other, trying to expand. I will just kind of talk about this. The heat season campaign, very briefly, is a deck of for 4 weeks of different assets that cities can run in their social media for 4 weeks. It started running in the States. Miami-Dade initiated it in May, and we're going to start. Athens is going to propose it to different mayors for Europe the beginning of next week for July. And finally, last but not least, ERA is in collaboration on many levels already with the Resilient Cities Network. We are kind of working, of course, with different CROs, because we are exchanging knowledge and kind of going back and forth with different types of ways of going about to dealing with raising heat resilience. But also we are trying to kind of find a way to make this, to build this collaboration even more specifically, to bring together ERA with the community of practice on urban heat and see if they could kind of maximize and kind of exchange knowledge and also maximize all the work that's being done on both sides from for cities and heat. So this is the end of my presentation. And thank you for listening, and I'm eager to hear your questions.
Thank you, Lenyo. And I think you ended with the collaboration with RCN, and that's what RCN is about. It's about sharing experience. And so I think Lauren will be more than delighted to pursue that agenda. Thank you. I mean, I think that Athens is probably one of the most interesting city to study on this topic. So it was great to have you here. It was interesting also to hear from Anouk about a city which is much more in the north, and people may wonder why would Den Haag certainly be focusing on this topic. But Anouk, I think you made a very good case showing that really this is the perfect storm, because the most vulnerable people are clearly the one most exposed. It's not like people who live who are healthy may experience heat, but they're strong, or vice versa, is really the weakest who are most exposed. And I thought there were also a really interesting example. I'd never seen an example of a water buffer. So I may write to you to get more example, or if you could post it online, that would be great, because I found it a very interesting concept. Only the Dutch would find water, mobilize water for almost everything, and have great ideas. I wanted to, Anouk, at the end of your presentation, you really talked about the difficulty some cities are still experiencing in putting this topic on the map and really arguing for it. And you mentioned even London. And so my first question to you, Anouk, and then to you, Lenio, is really about how do you assess the impact? And have you done studies in Den Haag or in Athens, or have you, are you developing a framework in the through the Resilience Center, Lenio, that would help kind of convince more the decision maker? I mean, of course, you can look at the number of deaths, and that's probably the strongest argument. But there, I think McKinsey came up with a report on heat waves in Asia, where they look at number of lost days of work, so productivity loss for cities and for countries. I've seen another report on energy use. You mentioned, I think one of you mentioned the increase in energy use, reduction in commercial activity. Have you done any of these studies? Are you aware of any? Can you talk about what you've seen, so people can maybe point us in the right direction from some of these studies? So we start with Anouk, and then we'll go to you, Lenio. Over to you, Anouk.
So one of the studies that we've used a lot is from the Technical University of Delft. They've done a research into urban heat islands, looking into where heat concentrates and what actually contributes to heating up. There's also from our Central Bureau of Statistics a research from last summer, for example, which then is a different research looking into the heat-related deaths. So looking into how many people actually pass away due to the heat. And I think, and what we're working on now is actually seeing what people working together with the ISS Institute of Social Studies and the Hague University of Applied Sciences to see how heat impacts people bodily, but also in terms of the behavior that they show and what they experience. And I think there's a lot, but it's kind of dispersed. So I think a sort of more integral research on the impact of heat would be beneficial to get it on the agenda, especially in the Netherlands. But I think globally, but I think Lenio can better answer that. There are a lot of institutions that look into this.
Lenio, you want to?
I think it's actually still, I mean, there's a lot of work that's being done on these issues, and I think it's growing. The amount of research that is being dedicated to how heat is impacting on people, both on the level of health, but also on all of these different ways that heat affects the economies, the social behavior, psychology, etc. All of these kind of vast realm of ways that heat affects us, and especially rising heat affects us and will be affecting us in the years to come, I think it's being more and more studied. Francis, I think that there is a lack. I mean, there is, even though there are quite a bit of studies, we still need a lot of there isn't, I don't feel that there is clearly yet a way that assesses clearly and shows clearly what exactly the effects are, because also the effects vary a lot. There's so many different aspects that can affect what a heat wave or how heat can actually impact different aspects, and there's so many levels of parameters that play a role that it's really difficult to really have clear assessments. But as city decision makers, we do need, so what, to make this answer easier, we do have a lot of studies. They tend to be specific, they tend to be kind of focused and specific, and they tend to also be quite difficult to translate as a policymaker from the language of the researchers to actually persuade the mayors or the vice mayors or whoever the decision makers are to take action by simplifying what the scientists are saying in ways that can be easily accountable and easily persuasive. So, you know, you can that's why studies like the McKenzie study are very important, because it's a study that is actually addressed to policymakers, and so we need more work like that. That basically, and I think part of what ERA is doing is trying to do that, to simplify information and make it so that it's more easily accessible. Even the ranking and naming effort has to do with that. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a difficult question to answer, actually.
Yeah, but it is a difficult question. That's why I asked it. But I think, first, I must say, I like your point about the need to simplify the idea so policymaker can grasp the importance of the topic, right? But I also think that to translate this on economic impact is what will help us convince policymaker to take action. And action is needed because the problem is only going to get worse.
Exactly.
Fact,
and this is another, the economic impact, as you said, is probably, I mean, the health impact and the economic impact are the two main ways that we can use to move decision makers. And we really need data for that in order to, you're absolutely right. These are the two.
We've started to look very seriously at this topic at the World Bank, and maybe it could be a collaboration with the Resilient Center. So
that'd be great.
Maybe we can talk about it offline. I'm going to pass it on to Lauren. I know she has quite a few questions. So over to you, Lauren.
I do have a lot of questions, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to ask both of the speakers in terms of finding allies and reaching out across the city. A lot of what you talked about is about sharing that knowledge. And where have you found the biggest challenges, and where have you found the best allies for this work? I think Anouk, you're still on mute.
Oh, I'm not on mute. Can you hear me?
No, you're good.
Well, in terms of, my question was in terms internationally or in the city, finding allies?
Oh, either one.
Okay, great. Well, I think in the city for The Hague, the best allies have been the community organizations. These are the organizations that are closest to the people and are the best sort of entrance into the neighborhood, and getting to know and to collaborate with these organizations is highly valuable. And I also think that, for example, the Red Cross, an organization like that, can also contribute a lot, because they have the expertise and they also have the position to do a lot of the awareness work and to assist people. And I think in terms of internationally, we've also connected a lot with the Global Heat Health Information Network. And I think that's also a network that tries to convey science to practical solutions. And of course, the network, but that needs no explanation, probably.
I saw Lenny giving you thumbs up. I was also wondering, because there were some questions in the chat about construction and other things like that. Are you finding allies who are willing to build differently?
In Athens, it's really difficult to find allies in the building sector that are willing to build differently. We're just starting to get the municipality to design public spaces differently and use different materials in public spaces, but the building sector is not yet. I mean, it's not true. There are some buildings that are starting to build in green ways, and I'm not. It's not true that they're not. The private sector is not also catching up. Still, I'm the reason I answered so negatively is because still we are in a carbon material related industry as far as the building sector is concerned, and we still are using cement, concrete, and all that kind of stuff, which really we should slowly change or move away from. The other part is the construction is also, we have to remember that the people that work in construction are part of the most vulnerable populations, and we keep forgetting that, but construction is really an issue for heat related health problems. I know the time is running. Lauren, what else did you ask me?
Who the best allies are for you, and I saw that you were nodding when Anouk was talking about community groups.
I'm not going to take any more time for that because I agree with. I would basically second what Anouk said. I would use basically the same answer. I would add other things, but it's not so important. The city networks have been extraordinary allies in pushing the agenda for these issues. Really, really important.
Well, we're happy to continue to be. This does feel like very much the beginning of this conversation on heat. And I think both of you have presented us with some really incredible insights into mapping the problem, the importance of data, and really getting knowledge, not just information, to communities. I think if there's one message I think that's come across really, really clearly tonight, it's been about how you need to really contextualize knowledge and get it to the right communities in order to protect them. And so I think we will have more exchanges on this. Francis, heard you loud and clear. We need to keep talking about this and perhaps find some ways to deepen the collaboration on this. So we will do that. And we will certainly try to have another session on this very soon. Unfortunately, we have to bring it to a close because of the time, but I want to thank both of our speakers who were absolutely fantastic tonight. So thank you, Elenio and Anouk, for being with us. Thank you everyone who's dialed in. And I'll say we'll be back here in 2 weeks with a very exciting topic of reclaiming the value of play in cities. So we're going to be talking about child-friendly, playful cities. So do come back and join us. And for now, just saying good night from me and from my partner in knowledge sharing, Francis, from Singapore. Hope everyone has a very good evening, afternoon, or day ahead. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.